Alex, who is now 36 years old, was my college sweetheart, and our journey together began in those formative years filled with youthful dreams and aspirations. He possessed those dreamy eyes that seemed to see right into my soul, combined with a strong and buff physique that many admired. I remember the playful moments when he would effortlessly pick me up and carry me around just to tease me, and how those light-hearted gestures only solidified my affection for him. We eventually tied the knot in a charming church ceremony that was a true reflection of our love, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated our union. For an incredible decade, we lived a life that was not only fulfilling but also the talk of the town. Our friends often envied the bond we shared, marveling at how well we complemented each other. As a 36-year-old female, I cherished Alex with all my heart, always envisioning a future where we would grow old together, hand in hand, sharing countless memories and experiences. Alex emerged as an exceptional husband, demonstrating unwavering dedication to our marriage and family. His loyalty, faithfulness, and reliability were unmatched. He consistently placed my needs and happiness at the forefront of his priorities. Every day, he treated me with respect, kindness, and empathy, ensuring that I always felt loved and valued in our relationship. He had a remarkable ability to listen to my concerns, readily offering his assistance whenever I needed it, and showing genuine care in finding solutions to any problems I faced. Moreover, Alex was fully supportive of my goals and dreams. He would offer guidance and help whenever I sought it, demonstrating patience and understanding, always striving to see things from my perspective. Honesty was his guiding principle, and he maintained open and transparent communication with me, never keeping secrets or withholding important information. He valued candid discussions, which deepened the trust between us. I took immense pride in my choice of husband, appreciating his steadfastness in our marriage, even if I sometimes yearned for a little extra excitement in the bedroom. However, everything changed one day when I encountered a man named Ethan at a business conference. He was 22 years old and exuded a charisma and charm that immediately captivated me. We hit it off right away, and after exchanging numbers, our conversations quickly moved from casual to more personal. Soon enough, my phone was filled with texts and calls from him, and I knew deep down that it was wrong to engage with another man in this way. Yet, the temptation was too powerful to resist. As the connection deepened, Ethan and I began meeting in secret. Before I knew it, I was embroiled in an affair that filled me with guilt whenever I was with him. But Ethan had reignited feelings of vitality and desire in me that had long faded in my relationship with Alex. Despite my love for Alex, the exhilaration and allure of my time with Ethan proved too intoxicating to resist. I was keenly aware of my wrongdoing, yet I found myself caught in a web of lies and deceit that consumed my every thought. The emotional conflict within me was intense. I loved Alex deeply while also grappling with burgeoning feelings for Ethan. Eventually, the truth emerged, and Alex discovered my affair with Ethan. The revelation shattered him. He could not comprehend why I would betray him in such a profound way. I attempted to explain my unhappiness in our marriage and how Ethan had made me feel alive again, but the pain etched on Alex's face was too overwhelming for him to hear my side fully. He grasped the emotional dimension of my betrayal, but I feared he would struggle to accept the physical aspects had he known the full truth. Alex implored me to end the affair and focus on healing our marriage, yet I found myself torn between my love for him and my feelings for Ethan. This internal struggle remained unspoken between us, as I didn't want to inflict further pain. Then one day, while I was out walking, I saw an elderly couple holding hands, radiating happiness and contentment. Their display of love stirred up a profound sense of envy within me, making me realize just how special what I had with Alex truly was. I didn't want to let it slip away without putting up a fight. So, I reached out to Alex and asked to meet up. We sat down for a lengthy conversation about our marriage, a discussion that required immense courage on my part. I opened up about my feelings of neglect and unhappiness, and Alex listened attentively. He expressed his love for me and his earnest desire to work on our relationship. However, he made it clear that I needed to end things with Ethan if we were to move forward. It was an incredibly difficult choice to make, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. I called Ethan and informed him that it was over between us. Ethan was devastated, but he understood my decision. I knew I had caused pain to both men I cared about, yet my commitment to mending my marriage with Alex took precedence. In the months that followed, we dedicated ourselves to improving our relationship, rediscovering the love that initially brought us together. We recognized the need for professional help to improve our communication skills, embarking on a journey of counseling specifically aimed at enhancing our ability to express ourselves to one another. During this time, we also made a conscious effort to reignite the spark in our relationship by organizing regular dates and rediscovering the enjoyable activities that had initially brought us together when our romance first flourished. It became clear to me that I had unintentionally taken Alex for granted, overlooking the depth of my feelings for him. It was in this moment of reflection that I understood he was truly the man I loved. Eventually, Alex found it in his heart to forgive me for my affair, allowing us to leave the past behind and move forward. This experience brought us closer than ever, further solidifying my conviction that choosing Alex over Ethan was the best decision. I came to realize that the grass is not always greener on the other side and that sometimes what we seek is right in front of us. Alex and I reached new heights in our relationship. I became accustomed to receiving beautiful bouquets of roses on a regular basis, both at work and at home, accompanied by sweetly signed cards from him, all of which expressed his passionate love for me. Yet, despite this apparent perfection in my life, I couldn't shake the longing I felt for Ethan. The very idea of thinking about him felt like a betrayal, and plotting ways to reconnect with him was a risky endeavor. I fought hard against these impulses, but found my willpower waning in the face of physical desires that seemed to overpower my better judgment. In a moment of weakness, I reached out to Ethan, confessing my lingering love for him and suggesting a rekindling of our secret affair. To my surprise, he admitted that he missed me too, and our connection reignited with an intensity one had never anticipated. Meanwhile, Alex remained blissfully unaware of my emotional turmoil and the reality of my actions. I took extensive precautions to cover my tracks, both in public and online, ensuring that my double life remained hidden. As luck would have it, Alex's upcoming week-long trip to another state filled me with excitement, as it meant I could spend uninterrupted time with Ethan in my home. When that day finally arrived, Alex sweetly expressed how much he would miss me. I couldn't help but shed a few tears as he left, but beneath that sorrow was an undercurrent of freedom at the prospect of having the house to myself. Less than 30 minutes after he departed, Ethan arrived at my doorstep, his face lit up with anticipation. Without even exchanging greetings, he swept me off my feet, leading me straight to the bedroom. However, during our passionate encounter, I was momentarily distracted by noises coming from downstairs, but I brushed them off, fully engrossed in the moment with Ethan. Just minutes later, I was jolted back to reality when Alex stood in the doorway of our bedroom, his expression one of utter shock. "How could you?" he shouted, clearly devastated. "I trusted you, forgave you, and gave you everything, absolutely everything." His words echoed in my mind as he stormed out of the room and down the stairs, leaving me speechless. I hastily wrapped myself in a sheet and rushed after him, desperate to explain that things were not what they seemed, but I couldn't catch up to him. An hour later, I received a text from Alex instructing me to leave his house. I immediately ushered Ethan out and began hurriedly packing my belongings, my mind racing as I contemplated where I would go next. Ultimately, I made the decision to return to my mother's place, seeking some form of refuge. I attempted to reach out to Alex through countless texts and calls, but he remained unresponsive, completely cutting off communication. A week later, divorce papers arrived at my mother's address, a stark reminder of his swift decision to end our marriage. He opted not to engage in conversation, offer therapy, or attempt to address our issues. Instead, he moved quickly toward a divorce, leaving me questioning how much I truly meant to him. Compounding my distress, my mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement at the onset of our marriage, which effectively meant that the assets and income we had accumulated during our years together were held in our individual names. Consequently, Alex received 80% of our properties, taking advantage of his significantly higher income, while I was left with nearly nothing to my name and no secure place to call home. To make matters worse, despite our numerous attempts, we had not been able to conceive, so I was unable to claim child support. Navigating through these circumstances felt overwhelming, and life seemed incredibly unjust. Now, let's turn our attention to another story filled with its own set of fascinating challenges and experiences. For the next chapter, I want to share about my wife, who is 45 years old, and myself at 51. We've been married for a quarter of a century and have spent our lives in the Midwest, working as farmers. Our family used to consist of 4, but our son tragically passed away 5 years ago. He would have turned 20 if he were still with us. My journey with my wife began when I started working for her grandparents, who were also farmers, laying the foundation for our life together. The journey of my wife began in a small rural setting where her family primarily focused on cattle raising and cultivating essential crops such as corn and wheat. Following the separation of her parents, she discovered a deeper sense of happiness living with her grandparents rather than remaining with her mom and dad. Upon turning 18, she made the significant decision to move in with her grandparents, choosing to contribute to the family farm. This decision not only shaped her future but also highlighted her strong connection to agricultural life. What truly sets my wife apart from the typical woman is her remarkable blend of strength and femininity. She embodies beauty with her long, flowing blonde hair and maintains an impressive physical shape. Her dedication to her work on the farm is commendable. She isn't afraid to get her hands dirty and shows exceptional care for the animals under her stewardship. Her extensive knowledge of farm tools and machinery adds to her uniqueness. When I first crossed paths with her 3 decades ago, I was instantly captivated, not just by her stunning looks but also by her impressive capabilities. Meeting a small-town girl who was both tough and attractive was a refreshing experience for me, and I was drawn to her vibrant personality. She effortlessly got along with the other workers on her grandparents' farm, establishing herself as a beloved figure among them. My upbringing was similar. I was just a country boy familiar with farming life, yet I couldn't help but notice that my wife's grandparents operated at a different level of success than my own parents, who were also farmers but faced their share of hardships. When my wife turned 19, we began dating. The bond we formed was not just romantic, it was grounded in a solid working relationship that made it seem like marriage was an inevitable next step. Life was progressing positively, especially with the birth of our son, who inherited our shared passion for farming. He showed remarkable promise, often taking the initiative to complete tasks on the farm without needing any direction. His natural talent brought us both joy and pride. But life took a tragic turn that none of us expected. One fateful day, while he was driving his truck on I-94, an uncontrolled 18-wheeler collided with him. The accident was devastating. He didn't survive, passing away in an instant. The heartache we experienced in the wake of that tragedy was unimaginable, with my wife struggling profoundly with the absence of our son. It was as though a significant change washed over her after his funeral. The vibrant woman I knew seemed to undergo a transformation that left me feeling as if I was looking at a stranger. Her participation and activity on the farm dwindled greatly as she retreated into a state of despair, spending entire days in bed. It was during this time that she began grappling with a severe anxiety disorder. Her emotional and physical attachment grew exponentially, becoming more intense than I had ever witnessed before. It reached a point where I struggled to leave for work in the mornings. My wife's overwhelming need for closeness made it difficult to attend to our daughter or manage our daily routines. Gone was the cheerful demeanor I once adored, replaced by a pervasive negativity that encapsulated her being. The change was so striking that it felt like she transformed into someone remarkably different from the person I had shared my life with prior to our son's passing. Nighttime posed its own challenges. Finding personal space in bed became nearly impossible due to her strong desire to cuddle. Her grip was so tight it made it hard to breathe, reminiscent of the hold one might expect from a professional fighter. Even when I thought she was asleep, she wouldn't loosen her hold. It felt like I was perpetually trapped in a physical embrace that suffocated my comfort. Additionally, the need for constant affection escalated to a point where she required kisses every hour or two, a stark contrast to our previous dynamic before the tragedy. Our intimate life also shifted dramatically. We had once been moderately active, engaging intimately 2 or 3 times a week. However, after our son's tragic accident, that frequency surged to nearly twice daily. There were moments when I didn't feel inclined to partake in such activities, but it seemed like my wife's need for connection was so profound that I hesitated to express my reluctance, not wanting to upset her further. In those heart-wrenching moments, it became clear that her increased clinginess was her way of coping with grief, a powerful manifestation of her emotional distress. I found myself navigating a delicate balance, trying to honor her needs while processing our own profound loss. It feels as though the choices we make together revolve solely around what brings her joy, leaving little to no space for my own preferences or desires. The dynamic has shifted so much that our intimate moments seem increasingly focused on fulfilling her needs, overshadowing the mutual satisfaction that these experiences should ideally provide. There are times when I question whether these actions have transformed into mere obligations for her, serving as a coping mechanism rather than a shared expression of love and connection. She often reacts strongly to even the smallest issues, which can turn into arguments that linger in our interactions. When she struggles with her emotions, it not only affects her but also creates tension around us. During her low moments, she has expressed her frustrations, particularly regarding the state of the farm and sometimes misdirecting that frustration toward our workers, which complicates our relationships further. In the midst of these challenging times, a 14-year-old boy began coming to the farm regularly to lend a hand. He had a tough home life, dealing with parents battling addiction, and this situation stirred my compassion. I suggested to my wife that we consider adopting him, given his background of neglect. To my surprise, she rejected the idea vehemently, which left me feeling conflicted. Despite her objections, the boy continued to show up, and I noticed my wife's demeanor began to change. She started showing an unexpected fondness for him, mentioning that he reminded her of our son, which initially raised alarms for me. However, as time went on and about a year later, her mental state began to improve significantly, and I recognized that a key factor was this young boy. He and my wife formed a close bond, one that I wasn't overly concerned about, largely because I had come to see him as a responsible and good-hearted young man. Eventually, she took the initiative to propose that we formally adopt him, aiming to solidify the relationship that had already grown naturally over time. Once we completed the adoption process, the atmosphere in our home shifted markedly. My wife's mood brightened considerably, and I began to observe the depth of the connection between her and our newly adopted son. They would often engage in late-night discussions long after I had gone to bed, with her staying up much later than usual, while I preferred my early nights due to my demanding schedule that started before dawn. My mornings commenced with tending to the cattle, a responsibility I took very seriously. This routine involved ensuring the livestock had adequate food and fresh water, as their health was paramount to me. I systematically checked them for any signs of illness or injury and administered medications when required. After tending to the cattle, I shifted my focus to the cornfields where we cultivated our crops. During planting season, my mornings could be especially busy, preparing the soil and planting seeds, often alongside my adopted son who had begun helping me. As the corn matured, I took on the responsibility of monitoring its growth, ensuring it received the right amount of water and nutrients. I frequently utilized irrigation and applied fertilizers to promote healthy development, while also vigilantly checking for pests or diseases that could threaten the yield. Depending on the season, my tasks varied widely. For instance, during harvest time, my adopted son and I orchestrated the gathering of the corn with the help of hired hands, friends who came to assist with the process using equipment like combine harvesters to efficiently collect the ripe ears of corn. After harvesting, my job continued with the critical task of properly storing and transporting the corn, whether it was headed for animal feed or sale at the market. Initially, I paid little mind to the closeness that had blossomed between my wife and our adopted son, especially since my daughter also spent time with them. 2 years following the heart-wrenching loss of our son, life started to regain a semblance of normalcy. Although I mourned our son daily, keeping his memory alive in my heart, I couldn't help but notice that my wife had forged an unexpectedly strong bond with our adopted child. This connection, though different, seemed to provide her with the solace she had been seeking while we navigated the complexities of our grief. They would frequently share hugs and find comfort in each other while watching television together, often snuggling under a cozy blanket. As time passed, this became an ordinary sight within our household, so much so that it stopped registering as anything out of the ordinary. Over the years, the intimacy between my wife and me shifted significantly, declining to a frequency of about once every 2 weeks. This change didn't particularly alarm me at the time. I attributed it to the natural progression of life, especially as I felt that I was reaching an age where the frequency of physical intimacy might diminish. With the demands of a long day at work left me with little energy for such activities. Both my adopted son and I dedicated considerable portions of our days to tending to our cattle and managing the expansive corn fields. My wife and daughter also played crucial roles, handling essential administrative tasks. They kept meticulous records of expenses, maintained detailed logs for the cattle as well as the corn harvests, and managed the necessary paperwork related to regulations and sales. Despite the stable routine, there was one particular day that stirred a sense of suspicion within me regarding the nature of my wife's interactions with our adopted son. It began when I noticed he was missing, prompting me to embark on a search around the property. Our setup included a separate barn area that housed the office where my wife often spent her time. I instinctively walked in that direction, convinced I might find him there. As I approached the office door, I spotted my adopted son's dirty shoes outside, an indication that he was indeed likely inside. The office door had a malfunctioning locking mechanism that prevented it from being secured from the inside, enabling easy access. Upon opening the door, I was unprepared for the scene that greeted me. In that moment, it felt as though I had intruded upon something deeply private involving my wife and our adopted son. Their expressions indicated that they were momentarily taken aback, but I refrained from dwelling on what I thought I had seen, choosing instead to suppress any unsettling thoughts. Fast forward 3 years, and our daughter celebrated her 18th birthday and prepared to leave for college. This transition shifted the dynamics at home, leaving just my wife, our adopted son, and me during the quieter moments. During the bustling harvest season, we would often have extra hands on the farm, helping with the increased workload. After long, tiring days, it had become customary for us to visit a bar for drinks and unwind. However, since our adopted son was underage, he would typically retreat to the house early as the day concluded. On one such evening, I instructed the other farm workers to continue without me while I stayed behind to finish some tasks that needed my attention. I had decided it was essential to conduct one final check on the cattle to ensure they were all settled in for the night. After ensuring everything was in order, I took extra time to confirm that all our equipment was properly stored away for the night. Strangely, I felt an unexpected urge to visit the office to inform my wife that I was getting ready to leave. This feeling was quite out of character for me, as it had become our established routine to head out for drinks after harvest work. When I turned the doorknob and opened the door, a wave of unease washed over me, settling heavily in my stomach. I was gripped by a sense of foreboding, sensing that something was amiss. As I pushed the door open, a rush of powerful emotions overwhelmed me. It was as if time slowed, allowing me to take in every detail of the shocking scene that lay before me. My wife, the person I had trusted above all, was on her knees, engaged with our adopted son in a way that shattered my world. My heart raced, shock and disbelief flooding through me like a crashing wave. My mind struggled to process the reality of what I was witnessing, and I was suddenly engulfed by a torrent of conflicting feelings. Anger, hurt, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal surged within me, leaving me achingly numb. In that moment, I felt a raw, primal energy coursing through my body, making me dizzy with disbelief. It was as if I had become disassociated from reality. The room appeared hazy, and my focus narrowed solely to the distressing scene unfolding in front of me. I had an immediate impulse to shout, to demand answers, to unleash the chaos churning inside me. Yet, another part of me wrestled with the urge to turn away, to deny the painful truth of what my eyes were forced to witness. As I tried to cling to the hope that the shocking events unfolding before me were simply a figment of my imagination, reality began to settle in as the seconds passed. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, compelling me to confront what was happening rather than attempt to escape it. A wave of understanding surged through me, breaking through the initial shock like a powerful tide, pushing me into a state of resolve I had not experienced in quite some time. Tears began to gather in my eyes, a poignant blend of sadness and frustration that felt ready to overflow at any moment. With my voice trembling, I drew on every ounce of courage I could muster to voice my question, revealing a raw openness and vulnerability that had been buried deep within me for years. "What's happening?" I asked, my gaze searching for answers. My adopted son, however, couldn't bear to meet my eyes. Guilt and surprise flashed across his face, revealing the turmoil within. My wife, sensing the gravity of the moment, shifted her attention toward me. Her eyes were filled with a swirl of emotions, shame, regret, and an unsettling hint of defiance that sent chills down my spine. A heavy silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the irregular rhythm of my own breathing, each inhale and exhale echoing the storm brewing inside me. In that split second, realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Everything had changed irrevocably. The solid foundation of trust that had anchored our familial relationships had crumbled, leaving nothing but ruins in its place. The feeling of betrayal radiated from both my wife and my adopted son, an emotional assault that ignited a firestorm of anger within me. Overcome with rage, I found myself grasping my son by the neck, forcibly ejecting him from the room. My wife's screams rang in my ears as she desperately tried to intervene, but the intensity of my fury clouded my judgment. There was a primal part of me that yearned to lash out and inflict harm, yet somehow, I managed to rein in that violent impulse. I warned him sternly that if he ever set foot in our house again, there would be dire consequences. With those words hanging heavy in the air, I turned away, leaving behind an emotional whirlwind of pain and chaos. In the midst of this overwhelming turmoil, I sought refuge at the bar, yearning for the company of friends who might help me forget the shocking scene I had just witnessed. The desire for distraction was palpable, as I could hardly bear the crushing weight of my thoughts and emotions. Yet even the clamor of the bar was insufficient to drown out the reality of what had transpired. My mind was a cacophony of questions, the most pressing being how long this betrayal had been occurring. We had adopted him when he was just 14, now he was nearly 19, and the timeline was murky at best. Eventually, the noise in my head became too overwhelming to tolerate, pushing me toward the decision to leave early. The urgency to confront my wife and face the harsh truth of our situation became an insistent itch that I could no longer ignore. Upon arriving home, I was met with a stark and painful silence. My wife was nowhere to be found, and it was painfully obvious that my adopted son had vacated the premises, taking his belongings with him. The finality of it all struck me hard, and for the first time, I could no longer hold back the tears. The weight of my son's departure and the reality of my wife's descent into a path of destruction became painfully clear. I felt as though our entire family had unraveled before my eyes. In a moment of desperation, I called my daughter, recounting the troubling scene I had just witnessed with her mother. To my surprise, she didn't seem caught off guard. Instead, she revealed that she had suspected something was amiss between them, even without having seen it for herself. While my daughter was ready to confront the situation head-on, my wife had chosen a path of cowardice. She refused to return home for months and ignored all of my attempts to communicate. When my daughter reached out, my wife's first response was to dismiss it as a mistake, but later she openly admitted that her feelings had deepened into something more complex. She had developed a romantic affection for our adopted son. The knowledge of this revelation sent shockwaves through me, especially with her expression of fear about how I would react. As if the situation couldn't get more bewildering, my daughter informed me that both my wife and our adopted son were holed up in an undisclosed hotel. Confusion and disorientation clouded my mind, compounding the sense of betrayal I felt. Despite my years of dedication to managing and operating our farm, I owned nothing in the eyes of the law, as my wife had inherited it from her grandparents. This loss deepened my feelings of helplessness and uncertainty. The emotional toll was overwhelming, leaving me feeling utterly lost in a situation that had spiraled out of my control. Lost in a swirl of uncertainty, I took the time to carefully scrutinize our business accounts, my heart sinking as I uncovered a troubling revelation. A substantial amount of money had been withdrawn recently, leaving me feeling betrayed and vulnerable. Alarmed by this discovery, I took immediate action to safeguard the remaining funds. In a bid to protect myself from further loss, I withdrew what was left in the account and opened a new business account, effectively shutting my wife out from any future access to our finances. The weight of this situation bore down heavily on me, stirring deep feelings of conflict within. I had always dreamt of enjoying a peaceful retirement on our farm, a sanctuary I envisioned sharing with my wife in our golden years. Now, however, that dream seemed more like a distant memory, overshadowed by the difficult choice I was facing. If I opted to file for divorce, I fully understood the implications. I could potentially lose everything I had worked tirelessly to build and invest in over the years. Despite having a sufficient amount of savings set aside that could support me comfortably until I turned 80, my passion for the work we had built together lingered. Thus, I made the difficult decision to seek the counsel of a divorce lawyer. During our meeting, the lawyer advised me against initiating divorce proceedings, highlighting the significant financial ramifications that could arise from such a decision. This advice left me in a state of hesitation, reluctant to disclose our struggles to others, especially considering the limited family connections we had and the potential ripple effects it could have on our tight-knit community. Throughout this tumultuous period, my daughter proved to be an unwavering source of support. Her steadfast presence gave me the strength I needed to navigate through my emotional turmoil, and I was grateful for the comfort she provided. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, my wife reached out to me after 2 long months. During our call, she expressed her desire to come back home and offered a heartfelt apology for her previous actions. She mentioned that she had begun attending therapy with the aim of repairing our marriage, which stirred a mix of emotions in me. To be honest, my thoughts were clouded with confusion and turmoil. Part of me was strongly inclined to file for divorce, yet the harsh reality of potential losses held me back from taking that step. The moment I discovered her betrayal changed everything. The love and respect I once held for her seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a darkened heart filled with distressing thoughts. I even found myself grappling with disturbing impulses, imagining harm coming to her in a desperate bid to reclaim control over my life. However, as I contemplated these dark thoughts, the memory of my late son reminded me to push them aside. Ultimately, I resolved to allow my wife to return, but I knew deep down that our relationship would never be the same. The foundational trust was shattered. In the time since the betrayal, I had adapted to the stark reality of our situation. I shifted my focus towards my own well-being and began devising a plan for the future. I started to envision a life outside of my marriage, one where I could carve out my own niche in the agricultural world. I dreamt of acquiring my own piece of land and establishing my own cattle herd, something that would be entirely mine. Since my son's passing, my wife's interest in the business had waned, leaving me to shoulder the responsibilities of its operations. I took on the critical roles of managing logistics, nurturing customer relationships, and overseeing the supply chain. In essence, I realized that I had been building a future for her instead of myself. With every passing day, I became more resolute in my pursuit of independence. I started laying the groundwork for launching my own ventures over the next few years, intent on creating something free from her influence. My future was no longer just about the farm we once dreamed of, it was about reclaiming my life and moving forward on my terms. I prepared myself for the possibility of divorce, knowing that my decision would ultimately revolve around my desire for a fresh start, free from past entanglements. As my life unraveled, I couldn't ignore the disarray around me. I found myself turning to the vast expanse of the internet for guidance, seeking advice from fellow users who might understand my plight. A little over a month ago, my husband, Troy, who is 31 years old, decided to celebrate our third wedding anniversary with a wine and dine event for our close friends. While I had my reservations about the gathering, Troy was determined to make it a special occasion. My anxiety peaked as I recalled recent events, particularly my lingering thoughts about his best friend. During a previous outing, he had caught my attention with suggestive glances while we all danced at the club. He had even signaled for me to join him on the dance floor while Troy was momentarily absent due to a stomach issue. Despite the allure of the moment and the alcohol flowing through my veins, I had declined his invitation to dance. Yet, the fact that I had hesitated to fully dismiss the idea left me feeling uneasy. As the party approached, I couldn't shake the uncertainty of how my interactions with my husband's best friend would unfold. The combination of our last encounter and the impending anniversary celebration left me anxious about the possibility of facing him again. The complexity of my emotions weighed heavily on my mind, and I braced myself for what lay ahead. A few weeks had gone by since everything had happened, and I felt an urgent need to confront the moments that had unfolded between us, to address them directly, and ideally, to move past them. To provide some context, Mitch, who is Troy's best friend, is 34 years old and has been a part of Troy's life for 2 decades. I've known Mitch for just as long as I've known Troy. Initially, during the first 2 years of my marriage, Mitch and I maintained a strictly platonic friendship. However, after Troy and I tied the knot, it seemed that Mitch began to harbor a fear of losing his best friend to the commitments of marriage. This change was evident in his behavior. He started joining us on nearly all our trips, and to further complicate things, he frequently brought along different women, seemingly avoiding any serious relationship. Throughout this time, my feelings for Mitch remained confined to friendship. However, everything shifted dramatically after that unforgettable night at the club. On that particular evening, Troy delivered an emotional toast, openly expressing his love for me and sharing his excitement about starting a family together. Overwhelmed by the warmth of his words and feeling a wave of embarrassment, I stepped away to the guest bathroom in an attempt to collect myself. As I was about to leave the bathroom, Mitch unexpectedly followed me in. What transpired next was utterly unforeseen and completely unplanned. The pleasure we experienced together was so intense that it overwhelmed my senses. The thrill of knowing that everyone else was just outside, completely unaware of our intimate encounter, added an element of excitement that I had never anticipated. We continued for about 15 minutes until a knock on the door interrupted us, followed by Troy calling my name. At that moment, a surge of guilt washed over me, and I instinctively pushed Mitch away, quickly adjusting my appearance to mask what had just occurred. A couple of minutes later, I surfaced from the bathroom with Mitch trailing behind me, and we both took care to ensure that Troy remained oblivious to the events that had just unfolded. The most troubling aspect of this entire scenario is that it did not end there. It was not merely a one-time incident. Just 2 days after the party, while Troy was at the gym late one evening, Mitch came over. We found ourselves embroiled in yet another intimate encounter, and it was amidst this that I heard the sound of Troy entering the house. Panic set in as we scrambled to cover ourselves, awash in a horrifying realization. The sight of Troy's face as he caught us in the act was utterly devastating. Initially, he had a complete emotional breakdown right in front of us, and it was a moment that I will never forget. However, he quickly regained his composure, and his demeanor shifted to anger. He physically confronted Mitch and, in a fit of rage, forcefully ejected him from our home, sending him out into the freezing -5-degree weather completely nude. Turning to me with a steely resolve, Troy made it clear that I would be spending the night on the couch. In a fit of desperation, he gathered my belongings and tossed them into the living room. At that moment, I felt utterly powerless, forced to comply with his demands as I reluctantly spent the next 2 restless days sleeping on the couch. The situation took another turn when, 48 hours later, I received a text from Troy. Attached was a link containing a PDF with a plane ticket and a letter. Opening the ticket revealed a flight from New York to Orlando scheduled for the following week, specifically tailored with my details. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks as I comprehended that I had jeopardized a relationship I had so carefully built over the past 5 years, with 3 of those years spent in marriage, all for a fleeting moment of indiscretion that lasted no longer than 5 minutes. At this point, the question of what to do next weighed heavily on my mind. I had a week left to try and mend things with Troy, as returning to live with my grandparents was simply not an option. I felt utterly isolated and unable to confide in anyone about what had transpired, which is why I began seeking external advice. In an update, I made numerous attempts to communicate with Troy, but he had isolated himself in our bedroom. He wasn't going to work, nor was he coming out to eat. It had been 36 hours since I received the plane ticket, and during that time, I hadn't eaten or slept a wink. I couldn't even bring myself to change my clothes, fearing that I would only create a mess in the living room as I remained paralyzed by guilt and anxiety. Feeling helpless, I knocked on his door throughout the night, but he did not respond. The only sound that pierced through the silence was the faint noise of the television playing inside. Finally, he emerged and stood at the doorway, and I mustered the courage to ask if he had eaten anything. I mentioned that I had made 2 sandwiches for him, which he regarded with a look of disgust before turning away and retreating to his room without saying a word. That moment pierced my heart deeper than any words could express. As time ticked away, I woke up this morning, realizing it was the day before my scheduled flight. On the coffee table, I was struck by the sight of several bags filled with new clothes, and an envelope that had piqued my curiosity. Unable to contain my interest, I reached out and opened one of the bags, only to discover a collection of my remaining belongings inside, interspersed with moments of nostalgia like my cherished miniature collection. Tears began welling up in my eyes as the harsh reality of my situation washed over me. He hadn't said a single word to me recently, and his habit of returning home late had become a troubling norm. I poured my heart into cooking meals for both of us, yet all too often, I found myself eating alone, the silence in the room only amplifying my loneliness. I would lie awake at night, listening to the sound of him finally arriving home, only to watch him immediately retreat to his room without so much as a glance in my direction. The absence of any meaningful conversation between us was astonishing. It felt as if our connection was unraveling more rapidly than I could comprehend. I found myself yearning to understand what was going through his mind. Was he seriously contemplating divorce? I clung to the hope that this was not the case, as the thought of it loomed over me like a shadow, a devastating blow that I feared might break me entirely. It had been a month since I was forced to leave our shared home, relocating to my grandparents' house in an effort to find some semblance of comfort amid the chaos. Despite my attempts to reach out, sending over 500 text messages filled with my thoughts and fears, he remained completely unresponsive. In a painful twist, he had blocked me on all communication platforms, leaving me feeling isolated and helpless. Yet, through a mutual friend he still followed on Instagram, I learned that he had been posting stories of himself hiking with his coworkers, which offered me a sliver of reassurance regarding his safety and well-being. Even if it filled me with confusion and sadness. Then, on an ordinary day, I received a large envelope that contained the very divorce papers I had been dreading. Alongside them was a letter, which I hesitated to read. My heart raced as I felt the weight of what was inside. I gathered my strength but couldn't bring myself to read beyond the first page. The letter was heart-wrenching, filled with his outpouring of emotions regarding everything that had transpired. He expressed his profound love for me, a love that seemed to hang in the balance of our crumbling relationship. The letter stretched across 3 pages, but I was paralyzed, unable to push past the weight of the first page. Eventually, I mustered the courage to read on, only to discover that he had chosen to take time off work to focus on his own well-being, a decision that felt both necessary and deeply painful. He mentioned his intention to block me on all platforms, an act that stung more than I could express. In the letter, he asked me to sign the divorce papers and return them to our address, but despite the clarity of his words, I found myself resisting that finality. What I truly wanted was for him to come back into my life. It was agonizing to know that I had crossed a line, becoming involved with someone else, an occurrence I never intended nor wanted. I felt an overwhelming burden of blame resting squarely on my shoulders for the situation we found ourselves in, and the thought of a life without him was unbearable. It had only been 4 days since I received the divorce papers, and in a moment of heartache and confusion, I signed them, knowing that I was sealing a chapter of my life I was desperate to rewrite.